Good morning and welcome to this Nexus and Anywhere365 webinar. My name's Glenn, this is my colleague Tom.
Good morning.
I'll just cover off briefly what we're going to be, I suppose, going over today. So part one, we're going to be handing over to Tim from Anywhere365 to look at their new reception attendant console. We're then going to be going over to our very own Byrne, who's going to be discussing, I suppose, ways that you can migrate your phone system to Microsoft Teams. And then lastly, we're going to come back to the studio here for a bit of Q&A and just to discuss some, I suppose, interesting questions that we've seen popped up throughout the webinar. We've also got engineers from both Nexus and Anywhere365 on hand throughout the entire webinar to answer any questions you may have. I guess just before we get into things, Tom, could you just give us a bit of an overview of the journey that us as a UC solutions provider has gone on to find Anywhere365 as a contact center partner?
Sure. So Nexus adopted very early on after the dreaded OCS days of 2007 when Link 2010 arrived. So we've been sort of working on that sort of ecosystem, Microsoft ecosystem, for the last 11 years. What we found with regards to that, and over the certainly for the first 5 years, is there was a huge demand for contact center solutions, integrated solutions that work within Link and within Skype. We obviously were trying to find that demand for our clients, but the problem is we found that there was big issues regarding either the product itself, the functionality of it, or the support that came with it. In 2015, after one of our UC shows in London, we met up with Anywhere365 and we found that their product itself was built purely with Microsoft in mind, tailored from the ground up, and worked and integrated very well within the Microsoft platform. Now, moving forward to where we are in 2021, we've successfully deployed A365 contact center and attendant solutions to a large majority of our clients within the UC market. And we now believe it's the single best solution on the market and the only one that we'd recommend for all our clients looking at cloud Teams or Skype, even Skype 2019. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Tim for Anywhere365, who's going to give a demonstration on the brand new attendant for Teams. So Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you to Nexus for inviting us to present today. We're excited to work with our partners, and I think it's going to be a nice session to cover off our attendant console. So as Tom mentioned, I'm Tim Field from Anywhere365, and I'm part of our global development team. I'm going to share a few slides today and then jump over to a demo to give you an overview of our new attendant console system. And we also have one of my technical colleagues on the chat, so please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation. Okay, I'll try to keep the slides brief because I know we're limited on time. So, Anywhere365. So we are a dialogue management and contact center solution focused entirely on the Microsoft stack. So the idea is we can help customers leverage their existing Office 365 licensing to be able to utilize and perform more efficiency within your environment. We've been developing our systems for around 12 years. So since effectively the early Link days. So without doubt, I will crack on. So a little bit of background about the company. As I say, we've been around for 12 years and we've grown significantly since 10 employees back 10, 12 years ago, and now we have over 200 employees around the world. So we are now existing in over 60 countries and we work across 10 industries. So regardless of the vertical, we can work across multiple verticals or any verticals, and we have customers in any walk of life. We now have around 5,000 customers scattered around the world. And we have offices based in Chicago, Rotterdam, and Singapore. So we offer a follow the sun 24/7, 365-day-a-year support practice. And we also have micro offices in other regions of the world, as you can see here in the diagram. So I would say from a safe pair of hands perspective, I would say you'd be more than welcome to join the family of many partners and customers around the world. So a brief introduction to our portfolio. We have everyone is a contact center approach, which is different to other organizations. So rather than having a traditional approach, which typically silos off contact centers for a support team or a sales team, our licensing structure allows companies to utilize our solution in all areas of the organization. So areas such as a finance team, back office, HR department can all benefit from utilizing some of our additional functionality, such as advanced call routing, some historical real-time reporting via Power BI, or even call recording. So I guess from an enrollment or an establishment, we can really start to benefit all areas of the company. However, that's more focused around our contact center, and today I think our main focus is on the attendant console. If you do have questions around the contact center, then please reach out to the team at Nexus, who is a valued partner of Anywhere365, can really help you obtain what you're looking for within your environment. Now, over to the attendant console, which is the focus today. Just to give you a very brief introduction to the call flow on how our attendant works within your environment. When a call comes through, either using calling plans or direct routing, the call will enter into your Microsoft Teams environment. Once the call is in your Teams tenant, effectively, we will allow your tenant to communicate with the Anywhere365 cloud, which sits within Azure. So we utilize some of the Microsoft APIs, such as the Teams calling API, to allow us to communicate with that cloud environment. So effectively, our Anywhere365 cloud will talk to the Teams environment to say, move the call from A to B, move the call from an operator to an extension, or move the call from a queue into an operator's extension. So effectively, the call remains within the Teams tenant, but during the consent and the communication between our cloud and the Teams tenant, that allows us to utilize and communicate with that tenant to be able to direct calls around the system. So that is it in a nutshell. We do have some more diagrams and some more detailed information, which again Nexus can provide if you want to take this discussion further and look at it from a more technical element. But that gives a nice overview of how that sits within your own environment. So now I'm going to jump over to the demo. So bear with me.
First of all, let's have a look at the logging in process. We have created a single sign-on experience, making it simple and user-friendly for the operator to log into the attendant. As you can see, we have added an attendant icon into the rail within Microsoft Teams. This will allow the operator to run the software within the Teams environment. We also have the option to pop the application outside of Teams. This is down to personal preference. In the conversation panel, we have a simple and clear queuing mechanism. This will allow operators to provide a clear overview of their incoming calls into the system. Underneath the conversation panel, we have our directory. This allows the operators to search through the Azure AD to find contacts that they're trying to transfer the calls to. There are also other ways of creating contacts, such as integrating with Outlook for personal contacts, or the operator can create their own contacts within the system. Within the directory, we have a multitude of attributes that can be stored for each contact, in addition to photos, again, that we can pull from Azure AD, and presence information, which we pull using the Microsoft Graph API from Microsoft Teams. We can add contact notes to a particular caller, alerting the operators where to transfer calls to, or alternatively, information related to that contact. For instance, announce all calls, working from home on Mondays. The operator can also create their own favorite list by adding the favorite star to some of the users within the company. This will allow operators to sort on their favorites by clicking on the filter at the top of the screen. This can be used to create a list of regularly used contacts. The idea is we want a fast, efficient way of finding someone within the directory. We can also use the search option. This will allow the operator to search on a number of attributes, so we can search for first name, last name, department, number, or even email address to try and find the person we'd like to transfer the call to. Upon selecting a user, we have any other information that we have stored about that contact, including their department, organization, and any additional numbers we have stored for that particular user, which we can call by clicking on the phone icon or even transfer to if we have an incoming call. We also have a live view of the contact's calendar. This will allow the operator to inform the caller when that contact will next be available. And finally, we have our homepage. Our homepage is composed of a number of applications or widgets that we have created to allow the operator to add context to their experience. We believe that providing as much information to the operator will allow them to handle their call in a more efficient manner. For example, I can add a Twitter widget to the operator's homepage. This will provide the operator with a live feed to the company's Twitter page. If a call then comes through to the switchboard in relation to a tweet that's recently been announced, for instance, there is a job available or a promotion that's running with the marketing department, the operator can clearly see what the caller is referring to and then transfer the call to the relevant department. We have created our own widget library with a number of other widgets, such as call history widgets and web pay widgets. We are also looking at integrating with business widgets. This will allow the customer to integrate with a CRM system, such as Dynamics, Salesforce, SAP, and many more. When an incoming call is then presented to the operator, we can display information regarding that caller, such as open invoices, tickets, or orders relating to that customer. The concept of our software is to provide as much information as possible, all within a single pane of glass, so that the operator can handle their call as efficiently as possible. There were also a number of different preferences that we can configure within the operator environment. We can change the colors, the languages, and also the layout of the screen. In this example, we have a larger queuing area and a larger directory. Or we can simplify the view and just have the queuing area and the directory. As our application is supported with the mouse, keyboard, and touchscreen, this will allow users to use our application from a tablet or a smartphone. In these situations, you are limited on the amount of space that you have, so therefore a more simplistic view may be more appropriate. So let's place a call into the system. As you can see, we have an incoming call into the Anywhere365 external queue. If we highlight our caller, we have any additional information that we have stored about that caller. For instance, in this example, it's one of our suppliers. They're calling from the ordering department, and it's the account manager that's calling through. We can add additional contact notes to that caller, such as please transfer calls to Tim, who is the account manager for this particular supplier. If the caller is calling from an unrecognized number, we can add their information to the system so that on the next time they call, we recognize their details. To answer the call, we need to click the incoming call icon, accept call, which will then pass the information to Microsoft Teams to send the call to the user's extension. We can then answer the call within Teams. And we're now talking to our user. To transfer the call, there are a number of different options to use. We can simply drag and drop the call onto one of our users from the directory, and this will perform a blind transfer. As we can see, the status of our user has changed to busy, so we know that call was successfully delivered to our recipient. I will now place another call into the system. Again, we can answer the call. This time, we can look up the user from the directory. Rather than performing the drag and drop transfer, we can select the blind transfer icon, which will again send that call as a blind transfer. Now I'm going to place another call into the system. In this example, I'm going to show you how to complete an announced transfer or a consultative transfer. Rather than clicking the blind transfer icon, we can now click the initiate call icon. This will allow the operator to place a call to the recipient while putting the initial caller on hold. Our recipient has now accepted the call, so we are now in a conversation between the operator and the recipient. Hello, Tim, I have a call for you. We have John Smith on the line. Would you like to take that call? The operator has the option to end the call and go back to the initial caller, or they can complete the transfer by clicking the transfer key. This has now sent that call to the recipient, with the operator having dropped out of that call. In this example, I'm going to show you one of the missed call alerts that we can configure within the system. Once the call has been answered, if the caller would like to speak to someone in our directory who is currently away from their desk, the operator then has the ability to send them a message. Upon clicking the email icon, this creates an email template. It adds the email address automatically of the recipient from the directory. It pulls all of the information from the live call into the subject matter. In addition to this, it will add all of the information from the operator handling the call. So all the operator needs to add is a subject, for instance, regarding invoice. Send. This is a very fast and efficient way of sending a missed call alert to somebody who is unable to answer that call. Alternatively, we could have searched for somebody else within that department if the call was urgent, or we could have referred to the calendar of that particular user to see when they would next be available. I feel that by offering multiple options to the caller, this allows you to provide a more efficient service to your customers. Having developed attendant consoles for over 25 years, we feel that we are able to provide a very fast, easy and efficient way of being able to handle calls within your attendant console environment. In addition to simplicity, we feel that bringing in additional functionality, such as integration with Twitter and CRM databases, really allows us to utilize the power of modern technology while also harnessing our experience of having developed these systems for over 20 years. That concludes our short demo today. So
thanks. I'll also wanted to say just one other thing, being a 100% cloud-based system based on SaaS, this can be deployed relatively quickly within your own team's environment. And Nexus will fill details on how that can be implemented with a 30-day trial later on in the webinar. So thanks for your time, and back over to Tom and Glenn in the studio.
Thanks for that, Tim. That was really interesting. It's a cool bit of kit, that actually.
Yep.
Tim, just before we sort of launch into the diet routing and licensing bit, just to touch on my commercials really around the attendant console, is that similar to sort of normal Anywhere365, or there's a contractual commitment, or is that just monthly rolling? How does that work exactly?
It normally starts with a 12-month contract, but it is based on a monthly cost. So you don't need to deploy the entire Dialog Cloud solution. It can be done just on an operator attendant basis.
Okay, that's cool. And in terms of pricing, can you share any details still?
I can. So the end user pricing varies from around £60 per operator per month is the end user pricing, and there's no additional back-end requirements for server, etc. required at all.
Okay, that's pretty cool. That, yeah. Brilliant. Oh, well, thanks ever so much, Tim. That was really, really useful, and hopefully that was also useful for everybody watching as well to see a demo of that. Yeah. So we're going to sort of, I suppose, launch into now the second part, which is how, I suppose, different options available for companies when they're looking to migrate either to Teams telephony from an existing sort of other VoIP solution, equally options if you're migrating from more traditional on-prem PBX. Tom, I know it's obviously an area that you do an awful lot of, and yep, you've got a wealth of experience in. Could you just give us, I suppose, a bit of a really high-level overview of various options available to people that they're going to have?
Sure. I mean,
before we launch into Barry's the more technical aspects.
I think really it's what we found, certainly from Skype and Teams, the similar questions always tend to fire up. The questions tend to be mainly around calling plans, direct routing, you know, how the actual UC platform is going to be connected to a telephony supplier, and what the consequences are of both options. Now, about a year or so ago, previously calling plans were inherently expensive, so they were basically costed out for any sort of organization up 20+ users. Microsoft have amended that now, so calling plans are indeed a lot more cost efficient than they used to be. But the thing is, where we have found is that in organizations of sort of 50 users plus, or even less perhaps, it would appear that direct routing still is the preferred choice. The ability really and the reasons behind it are based on the fact that you can choose your own telephony supplier, so mobile minutes, international call costs are all challenged or looked after by yourself. But also the key area is also the reporting, which obviously Anywhere365 as a product, either the contact center itself does one of the best detailed reporting, and any client looking at contact centers, direct routing is going to be the way that you would choose to go. So, without further ado, what I'll do is I'll pass you over to Barry Byrne, who is our Chief UC Consultant. He will be able to sort of unravel some of the aforementioned questions and also go through a little bit more detail regarding the designs and options open to you when you're migrating to Teams UC cloud platform. Barry, can you hear me?
I can. Morning, Tom. Morning, Glenn.
Morning, Barry. Morning. So yeah, I'll pass you over to Barry, who will now pick this up. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, and good morning to everyone watching. So I'm going to take around 10 or so minutes to take you through why we think you should use Teams as a PBX. We're going to look at calling plans, direct routing, and then finally, and most importantly, how you can get from your legacy PBX, which could be something like an Alcatel, maybe an Avaya, or even Skype for Business, and how you seamlessly migrate from to another. So first, why should you use Teams as your phone system? Well, first of all, and it's a terrible marketing term that I don't really like, but Microsoft called it an evergreen platform. And what that essentially means is you're always on the latest version of the product. Unlike traditional PBX manufacturers, where typically there is a software upgrade that would incur a cost. If you want a new feature, it might be an additional license. As you know, and I guess many on this call will already have an Office 365 subscription. It's very, very obvious that they roll out changes quite aggressively, and that's something that you would get as a part of using Teams as your phone system. Another great plus point, if you do have an Office 365 subscription, is you're actually already 50% the way there to using Teams as your phone system. So as you know, with almost every Office 365 plan, it includes Teams as an application that you can use that you're licensed for, and with the exception of an E5 license, the only thing you need to do is add a phone system add-on license on top. We're going to come on to that onto a later slide, but again, you're already 50% the way there with licensing. We feel it fulfills 80% of customers' needs around phone system. We're going to talk about the extra 20% in a slide in a moment. That's really around contact center, where you need to fulfill more complex requirements. But in terms of day-to-day phone system use, hunt groups, so on and so forth, Teams will do all of that out of the box. And if you are a customer where either you've had an audio codes or ribbon session border controller deployed for an existing Skype business environment, the great thing is that can be used with Teams. It's not a wasted investment. You can use that to migrate to Teams, or you can use that long term to continue to use ISDN or SIP that you may already have deployed to an SBC itself. So what core features does it use? Many of you have probably seen these, but it's always a good opportunity to go over what Teams actually gives you as a PBX. So call queues, as I think Microsoft has their own terminology for most things. A call queue in the Teams world is actually a hunt group. So yes, we can do call comes in either internally or externally to a hunt group. We can route that around users in various different methods, longest idle, all at the same time, serial, which is in an order. We can do entry announcements, thank you for calling IT, customized music on hold. So call queues come a long way in the last 12, 18 months in terms of the features that Microsoft have built in, and they're now at a really, really good mature point. Auto attendants, they sit at a level higher than call queue. So call queue is how you distribute your calls to your users. An auto attendant can be used optionally as an entry point to give the caller a push 1 for this, 2 for this. So in Nexus's case, 1 for sales, 2 for service desk. Again, there's business hours, out of hours actions such as voicemail, maybe send it to an out of hours IVR for on call. Entry announcements, as I mentioned, for call queues, and customized music on hold. The next 3 kind of standard PBX features really. Call park, that's where you can put a call in an orbit, have someone else retrieve it by entering a set of digits in the client or indeed in a Teams native handset. Group call pickup, again, Microsoft have their own name for this. They call this call groups. That's where users can populate a list of, say, colleagues, that if they're not at their desk, that call is then offered to that colleague. So it's almost like a mini hunt group that people can control themselves. And then finally, extra features, delegate calling. That will work in kind of a director personal assistant environment. Maybe the PA needs to make a call out from the director's DDI. We can do per user call blocking, which is a really nice feature. We've all been victim of kind of spam calls or nuisance calls in Teams now. This wasn't available in Skype. You can actually right click on a call in your history or use 3 dots to then put that into a block list. Simultaneous ring is it would ring your work DDI and also the Teams app on your mobile or another DDI. Direct dialing, as you'd expect, is everyone can have their own DDI, doesn't need to work on extensions at all. And hosted voicemail, and also there's no additional license for voicemail in Teams. It comes with the licensing that you already get as part of your Office 365 subscription. So everyone can have voicemail, you don't need to pick and choose. But does it really fit everywhere? Obviously, we're big fans of Teams and Microsoft in general, but we have to be honest where things don't fit. It fits for non-complex calling requirements. As I mentioned before, if your organization that just uses hunt groups, you might have an IBR. You don't do anything overly complex. You're not a contact center. We really think Teams is at a point now where it's very mature for you to be able to use that as a phone system. It definitely fits if you have offices in multiple geographical locations. On many occasions, traditional PBXs, you'll have a unit in each office. Obviously with Teams, that's centralized. It all lives in the cloud. Makes it much more easier, particularly also if you're international. Doesn't fit so much if you need call recording natively, maybe your financial services, things about nature. You need to complement Teams with third-party software. That could be Anywhere365 contact center that's recording, or it could be something like AudioCode's SmartTap. Real big one is wide area network connectivity. If you've got poor links in your offices or your internet is slow or congested, voice is very latency sensitive. And something as a part of a deployment that we do is the first thing we start with is a network assessment. So what do you need to use? Phone system. This is the licensing bit, probably the boring bit, but the bit that we need to cover. Again, you do need an Office 365 subscription, either an E1, E3, Small Business Premium, any of those SKUs can be used. And then on top of that, you need to add a phone system license, which unlocks relevant features. That can be done with Business Voice. That's a license that's aimed between organizations that have 1 to 300 users. If you're over that 300 user limit, you then need to move on to a phone system license. And then we're going to move on to calling plans and direct routing in a moment. But then you've got calling plans on top. So think of the phone system license as a way of unlocking the features. Then you need to add a calling plan subscription on top. Calling plans, as I mentioned in a second, are from Microsoft, or you can use direct routing, which is what they call bring your own trunk. So you buy a SIP trunk from your existing telecom supplier or someone new. So you might think, okay, is this a little bit expensive? And yes, it does get expensive. Tom mentioned earlier there's a break point with calling plans, and we think that's around about 50 users, whereby if you start timesing what this is going to cost per month and then put that over a per annum and then 3 and 5 years, you can see the example on screen of 250 users. On a domestic plan, that's only 120 outbound minutes a month. This is calling plans from Microsoft, be £37,000 over 3 years. Now, if you decide then to go to domestic and international, that then goes up to £162,000 over 3 years. These are the kind of sums of money that far exceed the cost of a typical PBX. So the solution to that, if you are over that 50 user limit, we think is direct routing. There's lots of benefits that direct routing brings. You can use your existing telecoms provider. Maybe you're in a 3 or 5 year agreement on ISDN. That can definitely be reused. We can do it on-prem or hosted. So we can put an SBC in Azure if that's what your IT strategy dictates that you're going to use as a platform. We can also deploy that in AWS. You can retain analog devices such as intercoms at doors, chip and pin, fax franking machine, and you maintain ownership of your numbers. You're not porting them to Microsoft in the direct routing case. You keep control. You're not handing them over to anyone else. Now, how do we get from where you're at to where you need to be if you want to go from a legacy PBX over to Microsoft Teams? There's 3 key ways that we do this. Our first is our phased migration. This is by far the most popular. I'm going to just annotate the slide in just a second, but essentially, if you focus your attention on the picture on the right. So what we do is we have your legacy PBX down the bottom here. Just say that's an Alcatel. That's probably connected to an ISDN circuit. They're your phone lines, and you'll have X amount of channels to take X amount of calls. Now we can place something called a session border controller in the center. This is something that we deploy by a company called Audio Codes. Now, the session border controller, think of it as a junction point, a translator between the two systems. And we plug your telephone lines into the session border controller, and then we put another little cable here between the session border controller and your telephone system. And what that allows us to do is intercept calls at this SBC level before they get to your PBX. So what we're able to do is do a very granular migration of even moving a single user at a time. So if we take Tom and Glenn as an example, we'll say, this will be a terrible drawing, but this is Tom and this is Glenn. Apologies to both of them. So what we would do is Tom's on the PBX down the bottom, Glenn's on the right. On the legacy PBX, when Tom phones Glenn's extension, we're going to force that call up to the SBC. The SBC will have a route on it that says, don't send that call out to BT or Virgin or whoever you get your ISDN from. We actually want to send that into Teams so it can ring Glenn. Vice versa, if Glenn wants to ring Tom, again, as you can see from the arrows in the diagram, it's going to hit the SBC first. We'll have a route in there. It's a bit like a firewall. It has a table that we can configure. We say send the call down to the legacy PBX and it will ring Tom. So we get what we call coexistence. We can have the two systems work completely normally together, while you can have someone on Teams and someone on your legacy PBX. And that works really well, as you can see on the points on the left-hand side, in terms of staggering the deployment. We can do departments at a time. It's great for spanning cost over a period of time. Maybe you're an organization that still wants handsets. They tend to be the biggest cost of any deployment. We can stagger that over a period of time as well. And more importantly, it reduces risk. If we move someone over to Teams and they don't get on with it, even though we'd have always recommend training at the start, we can move them back to the PBX. So the organizational risk is much lower. Our next option is a side-by-side migration. Now, this only tends to be used if you have a phone system that's already based in the cloud. It could be 3CX, Ring Central, 8x8, and you have no ability to put that SBC in between as a junction point between the two systems. It could also be maybe if you've got a PBX by a managed services provider. So we've done this in a lot of local government organisations. It's quite a crude way of making the systems talk together, but essentially you've got your phone system and phone line over here. This is what you've currently got at the moment, and let's just say, for example, say you've got 10 DDIs on there. Well, we'd configure an SBC in Azure. That's the item that's over here. We buy 10 spare numbers over here as well. And all we're doing is when someone calls your extension on the legacy PBX, we're diverting that call out to the PSTN, which is the public telephone network, into a temporary DDI in Teams, and that sets up the call. So to the user, it doesn't look like the numbers changed whatsoever. It's completely transparent to them. We're bouncing calls around. It's a bit like setting a normal call forward on your extension. Downside of this approach, as you probably have realized, when you bounce these calls around, it is incurring a local call cost. So these kind of migrations tend to be a bit more accelerated. It still allows you obviously to run both systems at the same time, and it still allows you to move one person or a department over kind of at your leisure. Is a bit more complex to do, and as I say, you've got that overall running cost is a little bit higher because you're paying to bounce calls around. The final option is what we call a cutover migration. Now, this is more applicable to smaller organizations. Again, you've exceeded that threshold of calling plans where the cost per month is starting to get quite high. But logistically, you can move everyone in one go. This tends to be that scenario whereby we will take the phone line out your existing system, we would plug it into the SBC. This is assuming that you've got an ISDN. It could also be for SIP. We'll test it out of hours, make sure everything's working as it should be, and then we need to pick a day in the week or on a weekend to cut everyone over to Teams. And they're coming on a Monday morning and they've switched over to the new system. Now, obviously, there is more risk increased in this because it's very difficult to get everyone to go back again. That is one thing to bear in mind. The cost of this option is lower because we've got less kind of ports in the SBC. We have less cards. There's less consultancy required to set up the actual kit itself. But it is a very, very quick way of cutting everyone over in one go. This is still an option that we do see customers take relatively regularly. And it's still definitely something that you would consider. So these are the three main options that we have for what we call migrating to Teams. Again, this can work with any PBX. We've migrated PBXs that have been 30+ years old that you still have a green screen to configure. It can work with everything. You might be on Skype, and if you are, you've probably already got this equipment to move to Teams, which means it's a really cost-effective option for you. So yeah, lots of different options where you can move to Teams. And obviously, as I mentioned before, training is very, very important, something that we advocate rather quite highly, because Teams is obviously a very different product to Skype, but we have training resources that we prepared, video based, that can help users go from system A to B. So I've kind of given you a very brief overview there of how to get from one system to another, along with the benefits of Teams. I'm going to hand back to Tom and Glenn now. We're going to go through the Q&A, and I can answer any questions that you might have on this process. So over to you, Glenn and Tom.
Thanks for that, Barry.
Thank
I
you,
think we need to move you into a graphic design department for definite after seeing the forward traits there. That was really interesting, as always, and thank you for sort of sharing your wealth of experience with us. I guess just from my own perspective as well, Barry, I know you've obviously migrated a lot of very large and sort of well-known household names over to Teams with an Anywhere365 contact center. What are some of the main, I suppose, mistakes you see people have made along the way when we're on that journey, and in hindsight, things could have been done better, that you might have, I suppose, to share with people? Because I'm mindful that I'm sure a lot of the people attending this webinar today will be taking the first steps on that journey now.
Yeah, I think a couple of things is how, and obviously people have been forced into this position, but pushing out of the client very quickly. Particularly if you're migrating from Skype to Teams, there are certain coexistence modes for voice that we recommend that you use, and Microsoft recommend that you use. In terms of voice in general, planning is a big one. Even though Teams obviously a newer system, if you're using a lot of legacy features in an older system, sometimes they don't correlate directly. You know, what you can do in your old system you might be able to do in the new, and it's really identifying what the requirements are in terms of telephony in general. So I'd probably say planning is a real big thing. Some people rush into it. Planning is a really important stage, particularly in a voice rollout, as everyone expects, you know, to be able to pick up the phone and use it. So yeah, I would say planning is one thing that I see people skip over quite a lot.
I would say, just to add to that, Barry, I think you'll probably agree with me on this. You mentioned about the training and how important that's, like, almost vital. The training and the timing of when you carry out the training, especially if you're looking at doing cross-department training on that, because the bottom line is when the product goes in, it's going to be functioning, it might be working, but if the users aren't able to use it, you then have that kind of initial thought that they think it isn't a functional product. So you then have a fire on your hands, don't you, Barry, really, then to try and otherwise. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's maintaining that confidence in the product. You know, it can be the best technical execution ever, but if the users don't know how to use it or they're confused, it can obviously give them the impression that the system isn't so great. So, and as you say, timing, you know, we have video resources that people can watch at their own leisure for both end users and administrators. Having that quite close to your cutover date is really good, because it obviously keeps it fresh in their memory. But yeah, training is a really big thing that, as I say, we advocate a lot.
Sure.
Absolutely. And just to touch, I guess, on the licensing requirements, again, just because I'm mindful that it's an area that Microsoft has, I think they've clarified it a lot recently. It was quite convoluted when it first came out. One sort of gotcha I've noticed people tend to fall into is for common area phone licenses. And equally, but I myself, I'm still not clear on 100%. It would be really good, because you just elaborate on it a bit, because I know it's something that a lot of big organisations where they have big reception teams will invariably come up against.
Yeah, so common area phones are used typically where you're not assigning a license to a user, so staff room, warehouse, things of that nature. They don't need to be licensed with, say, an E1 or E3 subscription. You can buy a common area phone license itself, which allows you to create the user in the Office 365 portal, give them the ability to, you know, enable for Teams and then the phone system. But on top of that, you either need to buy a calling plan for that common area phone, which is obviously a cost per month, or if you use direct routing, you need to give them a DDI and then do a little bit of configuration in PowerShell. So yeah, common area phones, they do need to be licensed. They are a little bit odd. So what the mistake people make is they buy an E3 subscription for a common area phone that's costing them, you know, 3 times what a common area phone license would be. So yeah, the purpose of a common area phone license is for general purpose phones that you've got dotted around your buildings. That's a good question.
I actually, one of the questions that came up was regarding integration with the CC platform with Anywhere365. Obviously, that was answered. You know, the out of the box, when you do put a deployment of Anywhere365 in and a contact center solution, this is more related to contact center, not attendant console at this point. There are many API connections already pre-developed by workstream that allow for connections to like Dynamics, SAP, which are the two examples that were in the questions there. Now, the reason I wanted to mention it was because they also have the ability to hook in. They have a whole vast of different organizations, of different vendors that it can hook in out of the box, but they also provide a development arm as well. So if there is legacy applications that you need to actually plug in and work within the contact center, workstream or Anywhere365 can help develop something to get that to connect. It's worth mentioning that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okie dokie. I don't think there's very many more questions come in, but obviously I completely appreciate one of the things whenever you do any sort of online event is afterwards you'll be sitting at home tonight and think, I should have asked him that. What we're going to do is we'll send out an email later today, just really to get everybody's thoughts, what you thought of the webinar, and equally if you've got any burning questions that you're keen to ask, feel free to just fire away there. We'll also include details of how you can take advantage of consultation if you are looking to I suppose migrate to Teams and utilize Anywhere365 contact center, as well as how you can take advantage of the free trial of the Attendant console too. But otherwise, I guess thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been fantastic, and hopefully you found it useful. And anything more from you, Tom? Or
No, I think no, that's good for me.
No, it's probably worth wrapping up there. So
yep.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks
for
very much.
Joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.